As the world continues to change and faces new challenges, China is looking to the future. Over the last few years, China launched 4 major global initiatives. They embody a vision for global governance, development, security, and civilization. The proposals stress the importance of multilateralism, cooperation, fairness, and equality. We begin with this report from CGTN's John Gilmore.
The Global Governance Initiative was officially announced by China at this year's Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Tianjin on September 1st and welcomed by the assembled world leaders. Its aim, according to Beijing, is to help international institutions become, quote, better at taking actions, working effectively, adapting to changes, responding promptly and effectively to various global challenges, and serving the interests of all countries, particularly developing ones. The GGI follows other recent global initiatives from Beijing, including the launch of the Global Development Initiative in 2021, the Global Security Initiative in 2022, and the Global Civilization Initiative in 2023. While all 4 initiatives are different in emphasis, they have an overarching philosophy, calling for broader representation and more inclusive decision-making in global affairs, reflecting the growing voice of countries across the developing world. These nations are seeking a more inclusive approach to addressing critical issues such as climate change, pandemics, and economic development, as well as a more inclusive representation in global institutions such as the United Nations, IMF, the World Trade Organization, and many others. China's vision for global development, security, civilization, and governance is seen increasingly as a contrast to increased tariff barriers, isolationism, and unilateralism. Beijing has long championed these causes as a leading voice in the 130-nation-plus G77 group, and tracing back to its support of the non-aligned movement of the 1960s and 70s. But these latest initiatives are notably designed as reforms for a post-Cold War world, facing new challenges in the 21st century. John Gilmore, CGTN, Washington.
For more perspective on all of this, joining us from Islamabad is Victor Gao. He is Chair Professor at Soochow University. With us from Cape Town is Ebrahim Rasool. He is a former South African ambassador to the United States. Also with us from Beijing is Andy Mok. He is a professor at Beijing Foreign Studies University. And also joining the discussion is Zoon Ahmed Khan. She is a research fellow with the Center for China and Globalization. Welcome to all of you. Victor, let me start with you. Why has China launched these 4 major global initiatives? What's the objective, and what does Beijing hope to achieve?
Thank you very much. You are raising a very important question. From the Chinese perspective, we believe the international order we are living through was founded back in 1945 after defeating Nazi Germany and fascist Japan. And the international order at the very inception was meant to be multipolar by nature, reflected by the composition of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, each with a veto power, meaning no single member of the United Nations Security Council should dominate the Security Council, and checks and balances are well in place. Now, somewhere in between 1945 to now, some country thought it was the unipolar in the world, which is in contravention of the multipolarity established back in 1945. China wants to make sure that the original intent of the founding of the United Nations, especially the Security Council, will be continued. And the 4 global initiatives are meant to make improvements for all the imperfections currently in existence in the international order we are living through. China does not want to break up the international order as it is and try to re-establish a new international order. The improvements which are absolutely necessary should be made to make sure that the world remains a multipolar world, and no country should be allowed to dominate above others, and no country should try to destroy free trade, for example, and peace and security and stability should prevail, and civilization should not be in conflict or in war with each other, but should be allowed to coexist with each other. And governance, either at the country level or the international level, should be very much improved. Look at the lockdown of the federal government in the United States. It's not good form of governance. Look at the gun violence in the United States from the Chinese perspective, this is not good governance. So all of us can make further improvements in whatever we do to make sure the world we are living in remains multipolar in nature and remains functionable for betterment of the fundamental interest of people throughout the world in more or less 200 countries in the world.
Ambassador Rasool, some of the themes that are contained in these four major global initiatives are multilateralism, cooperation, as well as fairness. How positive are these initiatives, and how are they seen in the developing world, especially in the countries of Africa?
Anand, I think that you couldn't be emphasizing a more important initiative or set of initiatives from China as the G20 is set to convene in South Africa, and as on the foundation of lies and untruths, the United States gives intent that it will not be attending and it will only take the G20 next year, but it will boycott the G20 this year. And that, I think, is followed by threats against South Africa for alleged genocide against white people, which is a fundamental untruth, and a threat of intervention in a country like Nigeria, ostensibly for persecution of Christians. And so Africa, South Africa, and the global South are feeling the sharp edges of this unilateralism that the United States thinks that it reserves for itself. And I think it is on the other edge, the negative edge of the trade war, that the United States makes the global South collateral damage as it battles the kind of dominance of China that is in critical mineral processing, rare earth elements, that the growing dominance of China in AI and technology. And so we are the collateral damage within all of this. And so it is really good for Africa, for the global South, and for South Africa to see an assertive China, a China that stands for the kind of inclusivity in global governance, whether financial architecture in the World Bank, IMF, or whether in the United Nations governance architecture, or whatever the case may be. I believe that we have never needed those interventions as much as what we do now. And so China is earning the respect from the rest of the world because the United States is increasingly saying that America first can become America alone.
Andy Mock, let's look at one of those initiatives in closer detail, the Global Governance Initiative. It calls on countries to work for a more just and equitable governance system and more cooperation. What is your overall perspective on this initiative?
Well, Anand, I think first of all, it is sorely needed given the challenges facing the world today. But I think if we look at it at a deeper level, any policy, foreign policy, domestic policy, actually represents a certain metaphysics of what is the world, or in philosophy, this is called ontology. And what China is demonstrating is a very, very different ontology to that has really dominated the international orders, as Victor said, since the end of World War II. And that is this. So the US-led system really is based on a reality that states are individual actors and relationships need to be contracted, constructed. And it's also competitive and hierarchical. However, the Chinese view is really, what is reality? Reality is relationships, and individuals, countries do not exist as individual entities, but part of an interconnected web. And the key here is harmony and balance. So when we talk about the Global Governance Initiative, I think what lies underneath that is an understanding of the world that it not only needs to be equal, but we need to recognize that it is all interconnected and no one country dominates. Just like if we look at the human body, we don't really say that the heart dominates the lungs or the skeleton, that they really need to be together, be in balance, and that really is the ultimate goal. So for me, this is really the best way to understand the Global Governance Initiative, and that it represents a fundamentally different reality, and I think probably a much more healthy one that will lead to longer-term global prosperity and stability.
Zoon, the Global Governance Initiative was proposed at the SCO meeting, which was held last September. That was the largest, actually, to be held in many years, in 24 years. It was attended by leaders from 20 countries. How significant is this initiative for the countries of the Global South, who, as Victor pointed out, are still vastly underrepresented at major international institutions?
Anand, I completely concur with also what Victor mentioned. The international order, the international legal order that the Global South has agreed to, has signed up to, and wants to uphold is the one that that was created in 1945. It is under the UN Charter, principled stances, and moralism versus morality versus moralism. What happened somewhere in the late 80s, 90s onwards, somehow we were told by the so-called, leaders, self-proclaimed leaders of the world, that we have now entered a unipolar world. This is a unipolar moment, and now we are part of a different world order. And increasingly, I think what's happened post-millennium, and also with an increasing interaction between Global South countries, increased emphasis of our voices and shared experiences, which China has immensely contributed to through the Belt and Road Initiative. We have platforms like BRICS, SCO, we have growing multilateralism, and what some people believe is also the multilateralization of the Belt and Road Initiative, where the significance of needed solutions, pragmatic approaches, and the fundamental rejection of a world that is dominated through unilateralism, divisiveness, and alliances that are actually built to, create a sense of, divisiveness. This is being collectively rejected by the Global South. Another point is, increasingly, if you look at what different scholars from a certain part of the world are talking about, is that China's growing initiatives, whether we talk about the development, security, civilizations, or global governance initiative, they are somehow challenging the global order. But what they're talking about is the rules-based order, which, again, none of the Global South countries agreed to. What we want are proactive solutions. And from the Belt and Road Initiative, which was, again, addressing the much needed infrastructure deficits towards all of these initiatives, and now, lastly, in September, the Global Governance Initiative, what China is really doing is establishing consensus among countries of the world at large about how to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, which are, again, the one thing that unite the world. It is also helping countries that felt rather isolated in this quest and maybe unable to find practical solutions, because, again, a lot of developing countries post-colonization were what we believe is called the waiting room of history, where they were just constantly told to develop a certain way, to govern themselves a certain way. These externally imposed approaches somehow left them in a space where they were not able to address the challenges that they're facing. And as Andy pointed out, this so-called country that believes itself to be the ideal to aspire towards is definitely not an example to follow. And as Victor Gao also pointed out, I mean, the current state of the American governance is not something to look forward to. So lastly, I mean, I think it's important to recognize that what China is doing is creating the space for consensus, for solutions, for a people-centric approach, for multilateralism, for rule of law, and for more representation. And this is what has resonated with the Global South since 1945 up until now.
Victor, the Global Governance Initiative focuses on key principles, and they include multilateralism, adhering to sovereign equality, and abiding by the international rule of law. How important is this approach at this time when we are seeing so much conflict, but we are also seeing, as has been pointed out by many of the other panelists, increasing unilateralism as well as protectionism?
Absolutely. I think the world is in great turmoil, and I think something needs to be done to hold the world together before it really breaks up in confrontation, conflicts, and wars, which will be a scourge for mankind. And among many things that need to be done, I think multilateralism and multipolarity will be very important. Meaning, we need to respect each other. When President Trump called China-US relations in the framework of a G2, while I admire him for his good intention, but I don't think China will embrace G2 because it will pit China and the United States together against vis-a-vis the rest of the world, which will not be a very good world. I think we probably should follow what I coined as GW, Group of the World, which is exactly what the United Nations was meant to be. So again, we come back to square one. That is a world centered around the United Nations, with the Security Council deciding matters relating to peace and security for mankind, with a major aim of preventing the outbreak of another world war. So far, despite of all its imperfections, the United Nations actually has not failed in that major task of preventing the outbreak of another world war. So I think in this overall context, I truly believe China is doing the right thing. China is calling out for calm, for sanity, for peace, for stability, for development, and treating development as the only real and hard truth, for example, and calling on uplifting people out of poverty and building up connectivity of all kinds. And I think eventually, I completely agree that China-US relations are the most consequential bilateral relations in the world today. And China and the United States need to treat each other as equals with full respect for each other, rather than scheming to wrestle the other side down as if there will be no consequences. If peace will prevail between China and the United States, the world will be a better place. And I think all these four global initiatives, which are intertwined with each other and preconditions for each other, can really be fleshed out into details and make the world order centered around the United Nations better and more suitable to solve burning issues facing mankind.
China also launched the Global Development Initiative that was in 2021, and that focuses on international cooperation. China, of course, plays a major role in advancing development, and as China continues to modernize, how much of a role will that play in the global south, in the developing world?
Again, I think that China steps into a breach that is woefully vacated by the United States. I think in Africa, we are reeling because the African Growth and Opportunities Act is all but defunct. I think the USAID, the PEPFAR money for HIV and AIDS, the research money for vaccines, and all of those kind of things have just summarily ended. And the same with the climate mitigation strategies. And so what we need, and knowing that China faces its own demands on its resources, I think we need China to be that bridge that moves us into a transition in which we eventually become self-sufficient, but we are not there yet. And so, for example, China's emphasis on renewable energy is absolutely critical for the way Africa embraces its energy revolution. I think that China is very clever, not confronting the US, but systematically building multilateralism through leveraging its economy. The Bricks and Road initiative, which touches Africa, creates entrepreneurship, makes sure that that infrastructure is being built even in Africa with a maritime BRI. I think its tech leadership offers us an alternative so that we are not beholden to one hemisphere. And the supply chains, I think in rare earth elements that China at this moment dominates, is absolutely crucial, because those are the supply chains into which we can feed. So all in all, I think that more is going to be demanded of China as a counterbalance to an unpredictability from the Western Hemisphere. And therefore, the development of the global South, and particularly Africa, is going to be dependent on how China is able to play this kind of role that it has to play. And we think China is eminently capable of doing that. And I think that the vacating of the space by the United States, I think, is giving China the kind of opportunity to take very quietly the soft leadership of the world.
Andy Mock, through its Belt and Road Initiative, China, of course, plays a major role in the building of infrastructure in many parts of the world, in many parts of the developing world, as well as making investments in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia as well. So in that particular context, how would you assess the importance of China's global development initiative and what can be accomplished?
Well, Anon, I think it's vitally important because without development, physical infrastructure, people's lives cannot be uplifted. So that is, I think, a necessary precondition. But I think we also have to understand the Belt and Road Initiative, the Global Development Initiative, really as part of a systematic, comprehensive, and pragmatic approach to building a better world. And again, I think the key here is the contrast. So we look at the US-led system, it's really one based on bifurcation. You're either with us or against us. And it's about enforcing, quote unquote, shared values. Whereas the Chinese approach through development, through the Global Civilization Initiative, through the Global Security Initiative, and we were just talking about the Global Governance Initiative, really is inclusive, and it doesn't define itself by saying, you know, we are morally right, morally superior, and the other side is not and needs to be eliminated or subjugated. So I think this is the philosophy that drives the Belt and Road Initiative and China's approach to development more broadly. I would also add that China is very unique in this respect, in that in many ways it is an advanced economy, a developed country. But at the same time, it is also a developing country and has firsthand experience with poverty alleviation, making sure children, if they're in areas that are not easily accessible, still have access to education through different models such as boarding schools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that this is, again, crucial to why China is able to play such a decisive role in global development.
Zoon, of course, these initiatives don't exist in isolation. As Andy points out, they all are part of, as Andy put it, a systematic approach to building a better world. These initiatives, as well as other international projects that China is involved in. And if we look at some of the major objectives, it wants to promote development, call for better and more global governance, peace and security. So how do you see all of this interlinked? How are they connected?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I'll continue with Andy's point that without the Belt and Road Initiative, without that basic need for infrastructure, for roads, special economic zones and ports, it is absolutely impossible to uplift people out of poverty. It is impossible to create opportunities. Another aspect, I think anyone who's following the conversations happening along the BRI between China and developing countries, they realize that poverty alleviation has become a central topic because it has become possible. It's not about giving people, money and stipends. It's about value creation by, uniquely understanding the circumstances and finding ways to create opportunities for people with existing resources. It's not about copy pasting a foreign model. It's about really, critical thinking. And I think, again, if we talk about now the Global Security Initiative, that's also absolutely fundamental because especially the Global South, the part of the world where I come from, so many others, we have been affected by conflicts, wars, and wars have never been the solution. We know that what we need is a comprehensive approach. We know that unilateralism, exceptionalism does not work. It only aggravates the situation. It only polarizes people. It only creates space for more problems, issues that the SCO is built to address. So the Global Security Initiative, again, it fundamentally tries to address that situation and hopefully we will reach a point where global governance, international law are upheld. And I'll also mention over here IOMED, the International Organization for Mediation, which should have existed decades ago. Why shouldn't we have a global organization, a platform where countries with differences, issues with each other, whether it's border issues or misunderstandings, are able to resolve those issues in an amicable way, in a way that, again, is abiding by the international legal order. And the Global Civilizations Initiative, I mean, that idea that somehow other civilizations, other perspectives are redundant or against modern development, or they are irrelevant, is somehow, it has to be rejected. We have to treat ourselves, each other, as equal participants, equal stakeholders, and equal partners, and equally capable of contribution to solutions. So, I mean, all of them are connected. We have to build the mindset, the capacity, and tangible solutions.
Okay. Victor, China has also launched the Global Security Initiative, and Beijing has stressed the importance of respect for sovereignty, dialogue, and peaceful resolution of disputes. How important and vital is that approach right now when we see conflicts around the world?
Absolutely. That's one of the most important things facing mankind. If you look around the world, there are wars, there are atrocities, there are genocide, etc., conflicts, confrontation, and there are clamorings for a resurrection of Cold War, for example. So all these are very dangerous themes, and if they are not managed well, they may actually get out of control and escalate and become global scourge. And I think the Global Security Initiative calls for peace, calls for stability, calls for walking away from any kind of this Cold War mentality, calls for stopping dividing the world into opposing and adversarial blocs, for example, and calls for harmony and peaceful coexistence among countries. And if there is any war breaking out, try to put the war out as quickly as possible, and then figure out what went wrong and how to prevent the outbreak of another war, rather than, for example, keep pouring more fuel onto the fire, as if, for example, the conflagration has not yet already brought so much suffering to the people, especially innocent people. Now, all this is embodied in the Global Security Initiative. We want to see a world secure and safe, free from wars and conflicts and confrontations, free from the Cold War mentality, and free from dividing up human beings into opposing blocs, preparing for another conflagration, which will be a scourge for mankind, especially when nuclear weapons become more and more scattered around in the world, and especially because this AI revolution may really constitute a major threat to mankind as a whole if it is not managed properly.
Okay, and that's where we need to leave it. Thank you to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.